Welcome back to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guest today is Timothy Locke, AIA Management Partner at OPAL Architecture in Belfast, Maine. Timothy is an architect, educator, and advocate leader in ecological design whose work advances a more resourceful and resilient built environment. As management partner at OPAL, he leads the firm's largest and most technically demanding institutional projects, while guiding its overarching approach to climate action and building ecology. He is the author of The Dimensions of Building Ecology, OPAL's proprietary design framework, which measures human impact across 5 key areas: emissions, materials, water, ecosystems, and human health. Timothy's work reflects a belief that architecture must be both ecologically grounded and socially transformational. His work includes many award-winning projects, such as the Davis Center for Human Ecology at College of the Atlantic, the Passive House certified Warren Woods Ecological Field Station for the University of Chicago, and challenging institutional projects such as Waring School and Chewonki, all of which integrate advanced energy performance with deep and broad ecological requirements. Timothy serves on the AIA Maine Board of Directors, the AIA National Strategic Council as chair of the Climate Study Group, served as co-chair of the AIA Maine Committee on the Environment for 8 years, and led a group of architects advising the Biden-Harris administration on definitions and pathways to zero-emissions buildings. The project we will be talking about today is the Davis Center for Human Ecology at College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, Maine. Beautiful place, by the way. Set along the oceanfront at College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, Maine, the Davis Center for Human Ecology is more than a place to study. It's a built reflection of the college's mission to live in harmony with the natural world. Created in partnership with Susan T. Rodriguez Architecture and Design, the building weaves together classrooms, laboratories, art studios, offices, and a greenhouse, fostering cross-disciplinary connections in a single vibrant hub. Now, let's get into the details. Welcome back to Detailed. My guest today is Timothy Locke, AIA, Management Partner at OPAL Architecture in Belfast, Maine. A lovely state, by the way. I've been there, not to Belfast, but to Maine a number of times, and I love it. The project we're chatting about today is the Davis Center for Human Ecology at College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, Maine. Timothy, first, I just want to shout this out. Congratulations on the recent AIA Coat Top 10 Award for this particular project. I was lucky enough to actually be sitting there watching you receive this award. So I was like, oh, cool. I'm going to be interviewing them soon. How are you? Recovered from the AIA conference yet?
I think so. We're now almost 2 weeks out, but it certainly is a whirlwind every year to be at conference. And I have many obligations right now in national leadership. I sit on strategic council, so the meetings started early and ended very late. And it's hard to believe it was only 2 weeks ago, but I think we're getting there. Yeah.
Boston's a lovely city.
Yes.
My son used to live there, so I've spent quite a bit of time there. So I was not disappointed at all that we got to go hang out in Boston again. So we start the podcast. I always start with some random icebreaker question that I pick out of the air. And I thought, top 10 winner, great project. If you can do great projects, you probably have a great firm. Tell me, what's your favorite thing about your company culture?
That's a great question. I think that we have the great thing about our company culture right now is that we have a diverse group of people that is small, small to verging on medium sized, but is all kind of willing to take the ride of um, what if we approach design from a little bit different lens than maybe they were exposed to in school. Maybe they might have been exposed to at other firms. That at Opal, we're really thinking, could you design for an ecological condition, a human ecological condition, and not necessarily for the individual needs of every project? Yes, we want to, of course, accommodate those, but accommodate them in a way that's about us as humans thriving within our ecology. And it does take kind of centering a different set of inputs that often many of our staff aren't exposed to. So my great pleasure is be able to come into the office today, every day, knowing that I'm going to be surrounded by a group of people that's willing to accompany me on that journey, and I think that that's pretty unique, and I'm really grateful for it every day, every week, even when the projects are challenging.
It is really unique. I mean, any of us who have been around a little while know what the typical atmosphere is in a lot of firms. It's push, push, push. It's all about billable hours all the time, and you got to get the project done and make the most profits that you can in the process. And obviously, I'm not saying that there isn't design and creativity involved. Of course, all of that is involved, but there's often not a lot of room to go outside the box. And when you have an opportunity to do that, I think that's pretty special.
Yeah, and I think that I have two business partners, and two of us, myself and my business partner Riley, both came from New York for myself, and Riley coming from Los Angeles, coming from very intense and competitive cultures of the architectural discipline in those cities, and kind of realizing that there may be a niche within design that doesn't require that type of intensity, is if you're able to kind of shift where you place the intensity. And joining our third partner, who was already here in Belfast and early days pursuing passive house projects, which at that point were quite radical, not so much anymore. Um, but then to kind of pick up that baton and kind of run with it across all these different aspects of, what then was considered sustainable design, and now we call internally ecological design, and seeing how that can be the intensity rather than what we might kind of characterize as the rat race in the bigger urban areas, which was, I think we were seen as pushing kind of all architects, regardless of notoriety, in this kind of race to the bottom in terms of um, quality of the end product for the people we're designing for and the planet. And we kind of say up here we're so far removed from that. It's almost like a northern frontier where we can kind of mess around and try things. And I think it's yielded a culture that's really unique out of that.
Well, and what a lovely place to do it in. Maine is such a beautiful state. I need to get
Yeah,
back there again one of these days.
definitely.
There's a conference I've been to a couple of different times now on what's it called, Diamond Island.
Oh, sure.
And the last time I got to do this pedal kayak all the way around the island, and it's like, I could do this. I could do this all the time. I'm in Portland, Oregon. I
Oh,
mean, we have plenty of beauty and nature and all of that here, but it was just such a lovely trip. I will never forget that trip. So let's talk about this project. I'm sitting here as I was reading the information that, the project information that you sent me, and I'm like, What is a Center for Human Ecology? It's like, I don't even know what that is. So why don't you tell me?
Sure.
Tell me what that is and give me a little background on this project.
Yeah. So the Center for Human Ecology comes from the fact that the College of the Atlantic, very, very small um, liberal arts college on the coast of Maine. So it sits right on Frenchman's Bay, which is on Mount Desert Island, which is the same island that Acadia National Park is on, which is usually a good geographical locator for people that aren't maybe familiar with Maine. In fact, a trail that leads into the park is right across the street from the main entry to campus. And it's a very small college. So there's only 350 students. It's just over 50 years old, and they have a single major on campus. You can only have one major, and that major is human ecology. And it is, by definition, for all students, cross-disciplinary. They have to take coursework in what we would, those of us used to conventional higher education might think of as different departments that you wouldn't always necessarily even maybe venture into during your college experience. They're required as part of their core curriculum to take science class, to take arts classes, to take other humanities classes as well, to kind of enrich what they've defined as a degree in human ecology. So this building, when it was conceived as an idea, this goes back well over 10 years at this point, before we were involved, before any architects were involved in the project, was a long-term vision to replace what was their main academic building on campus and was intended to be their first purpose-built academic building on campus. The campus itself is a conglomeration of 8 um, what used to be coastal residences for folk summer homes from the cities at the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century. And over time, they got purchased by the college and combined into one campus. And almost all of the occupation of those buildings was just repurposing these existing residential estates and the outbuildings on those estates. And so in the mid 80s, they had a large fire in one of those buildings, and over the next couple of years, quickly built a academic building to replace it that was intended to be temporary. That building's still standing today, still has classes in it, but they knew over time that eventually, they had outgrown and needed to kind of purpose build an academic classroom building at the level that it needed to be to maintain, their status as an institution of higher education. And combined with their dedication to what they've defined internally as human ecology is a deep dedication to sustainability. They now, for 9 years straight, have been named the greenest campus in the U.S. And when we started working with them, they were only on maybe the 3rd consecutive year of that. I can't remember. I'm not going to try to do public math right now on the podcast, but it was something like that. And so going into a project that was for a human ecology educational purpose and had all the way from uh, arts and printmaking studios, painting studios, all the way to zoology labs where they were dissecting mammal specimens that they would get from allied whales. So if there was say, a beached whale carcass, it gets taken to the College of the Atlantic and they do dissections with students there. So the uses that were happening in this building were quite broad, representative of this kind of human ecological lens, and then also the added reality that in order to maintain their status, well-earned status as the greenest campus in the U.S., that this had to be kind of the pinnacle of building ecology as well. And so this is, I say, all the way back in 2017, they went out to RFP on this project, and we had a working relationship already with now is a really close friend of mine and colleague, Susie Rodriguez in New York City, who had been with NEAD and had her own practice, and we'd done a few projects together, her and I. And we elected to go after that project together as a kind of, I'd say, also unique take on how to collaborate on a project of this scale. Um, Not a huge building, but also a rather complicated building, both technically and programmatically. And so being able to combine essentially two small firms that had deep specialties in academic work for the arts and sciences, Susie had a lot of experience in, and our firm in ecological design, really progressive ecological design beyond certification, that this could be something that could really offer a huge benefit to the client if they were willing to engage with something that was a little bit different. Again, it's like we weren't doing the typical design architect of record model where there's a big corporate firm paired with a design firm. Neither of us were that. Neither of us intend to be that. And we both have kind of very strong viewpoints on what is possible. And so we thought that that would benefit the project, and I think that they saw that too. We had the added benefit, I think, at least for me, I see it as a benefit that I grew up personally a half an hour from the campus. I'm the only person at OPAL that grew up in Maine. I spent a long time in New York City practicing before returning with my family, but actually went to day camp at College of the Atlantic when I was 10 and was there on campus. And I think the ability to come back and do this project is truly a highlight of my career. I know it will last as a highlight. To be able to be in this special place for me as a child and back there as a professional working with that institution was so rewarding. And I was thankful that they were able to see that commitment, not just from myself, but the firm in general being local and bringing that kind of truly collaborative spirit to their community. Um, the other thing about it is that it's just a incredibly unique place to work because they have modeled their entire governance around New England town meeting. And so all of the interviews, all the design meetings were open to the entire student body and entire staff. And sometimes that was much more well attended than we ever would have expected. Let's just say it that way. And the president, now former president of the college, Darren Collins, who was kind of our touch point the entire time. And he's like, it's really hard to have 450 clients, isn't it? Yes, it can be challenging, but I think it also, given the kind of inception of the project from the design standpoint between Susie and I, is this kind of really true, unique collaboration that you don't see a lot. It's kind of worked because we were coming at it with that open mind between us, and they were coming at it because that's just the way they are, that every student is totally welcome and encouraged to raise their hand and ask questions of the fancy architectural team in front of them. That I do think it actually yielded a better project for them. And the results are evident in that. And
Okay, I
yeah,
have to ask, at 10 years old, did you have any idea that you would become an architect someday?
not at 10, but I did do my first architectural job shadow in middle school. And
Oh,
I
wow.
like to tell, I have a 14-year-old now who just finished her first year in high school, and sometimes she'll get frustrated at me when we're talking about her future and say, "Well, you always knew what you wanted." And I was like, "I got totally lucky." And it's not everyone, but I certainly did. Somehow it stuck with me. But I didn't ever think at 10 that I'd be back there working, for sure.
Definitely coming full circle.
Yeah.
So tell me, what were the client's goals or needs for this building? What did they
Yeah.
want to, outside of the bigger picture of really doing a building that fit who they are? What services were they trying to serve here?
I'd say their goals were threefold. Um, I'm sure if we were to ask the people that were involved at that point on their board of directors and in the administration, they might have more. But distilling them, there was just the practical reality that they needed appropriate space for the level of work that they were doing and the level of students that they were attracting, and they just didn't have it. Like, so that's kind of a core need that we see in smaller institutions in a lot of our work. It's become something that's a pretty important through line in our practice is supporting smaller institutions in our state and in New England, because oftentimes practical needs are very real for them. And that I'd say was probably number one, even if they had aspirational goals beyond that were achieved. And then I'd say the two aspirational goals beyond that were um, maintaining their leadership in sustainability and have that represented in the building. That was critically important and evident right at the very beginning that um, we were awarded the project. One of the first things we got was a 9-page, 10-point font lists of sustainable building criteria that had been approved by the college that we were expected to follow, that it was essentially an assemblage of all of the metrics from Passive House, Living Building Challenge, a few aspects of LEED Platinum, and like put all together in one document and then relabeled as the College of the Atlantic's sustainable building standards. And we were expected to report on them. And like, oh, you don't want to do a certification, but you're basically like following all these things, which was great for us because we had experience in a lot of those criteria already. But it was incredibly aggressive and clearly important. We had to have continuous meetings with their sustainability committee, which was also formed with students, faculty, and staff, and equally aggressive in their questioning of the design as the design meetings. And I think the third was a seriousness. Um, they wanted to award the building to a team that they knew could bring a level of design notoriety that put them on the map, right? That this was a big expense for them, their first true investment in a all academic building, and that it carried with it a lot of expectations on it being notable, and that was very important. So it had to kind of hit those three criteria without any of them really being dropped. I think a lot of projects could say that, but I think that as architects, we always know that maybe one of them could go. And then this project, it really was the case that it couldn't. Too much was at stake given the scale of the institution to say relent on the design standards in order to achieve, say, more program capacity or higher level sustainability targets. And I think that's a real, I think, testament to their choice to commit to our team because I think we were nimbly able to address that because we were used to doing, really advanced sustainable projects with good measured outcomes without necessarily going for certification, because it's just the way we design. And Susie, with the establishment of her new practice, was willing to bring all that experience from the larger academic work and deliver it at a more modest budget maybe than some of those other projects in order to make sure that they were getting that level of both. And I think that I mean, I like to think now that they probably couldn't have succeeded in that way with any other groupings of firms. But of course, I'm going to say that I'm very biased. But I do think it really was born out of their goals and literally everyone in the community committing to them, and not letting them slide.
Well, I think it's a huge kudos to the client, just based on who they are, that they really walked the walk on this building. Because
Yes.
this is, I mean, we'll get to it in a little bit, but this is really got some high level um, goals, especially in the sustainability arena. That might
Yep.
make somebody else run screaming, like, "Oh, wait a minute, how are we going to make all that happen?" But to teach what they teach, but then build a building that really backs that up. Not everybody does that. So I'm sure they were really happy about the award.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think that what we know in the industry, architecture projects are so long that by the time you get awarded for the work, a lot of the people on the client side have moved on, but certainly I think that they are very proud. I think it's beyond the expectations that they would have expected, and it's interesting that this project, and I think it's testament to those goals that we just talked about. It won the top design award last year, it won the architecture award last year, and then won Code Top 10 this year, because it really is the nexus, and that was the intent of those two priorities. And I think that that's probably beyond even what, um, maybe we would have expected, Susie and I, in starting the project, but, it shows what you can get if you commit to outcomes and not necessarily defaulting to, we like to say defaulting to plaques on the wall and using certifications as a way to prove it. It's like, no, let's just lean in and spend the money where it's gonna show in the actual outcome. And, yeah, so to be proven right on that is certainly gratifying, and I think that they would agree.
Well,
They were
I
proven
hear
right.
more and more of that, especially now that I'm doing this podcast and I get to talk to architects all over the world, not just all over the United States. And I hear more and more people are focusing their efforts, especially in the sustainability arena, on those outcomes rather than the plaque on the wall. Um,
Yeah.
and kind of almost feels like we have evolved enough as an industry that those certifications are becoming less important because more and more people are just designing that way.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, I over the last 10 years as we were developing our internal approach and kind of codifying that into something that we could really, use to help educate staff, educate clients, and bring them along. I think, one important focus to us coming out of, now 15 years of passive house design as the beginnings of the practice and then growing, realizing that there were certain frameworks for design that allowed the end user to see immediate and obvious benefit, like architectural benefit and the quality of space and the quality of their lives in the space, that if we were starting to sell that was a winning design strategy and also a winning business strategy, because the client would be spending less money on consulting and certification, and that money could go into, um, actual performance or aspects of the design itself. And, I think it became incredibly important as a discipline. We grew beyond just focusing on, say, energy reduction as a goal and moved into some aspects of sustainable design, or what we would now call ecological design, that are not necessarily provable with an ROI, but are definitely provable with quality of life within the spaces we design. And starting to kind of really focus on that outcome, I think has really made I think it's made design better across the entire globe, right? Like, it's, like, amazing to see just the set of winners of the Code Top 10 2 weeks ago that I'd say 5 years ago, even maybe more recently, we would expect most of them to carry a certification, and I think only maybe half did, and most of it was proven based on measured outcome. And I think it's a testament to organizations like, um, well, I'll just shout out like AIA, for instance, in expanding what it means to be a sustainable building, and creating their own framework that drew from aspects of these other certifications, but didn't require individual projects to be certified to test against. Um, that really was about trying to move the entire industry to that place that you just described, and that's a success, and we should, I think, all be proud of that. And I would even say that I think we see some certifications starting to move in that way too. I'm really excited, um, as a person that had kind of gotten a little bit, I don't know, let's say disillusioned by the direction of USGBC and LEED, to see LEED 5 come out this year and have it be much broader, much more about actual outcome based and circularity and adaptive reuse, and say, okay, like people are hearing this, people are seeing that, the end users of these buildings, which is ultimately who we're designing for, want that. They want this kind of holistic outcome, not just a numbers game. And I am, I think, despite where we are in this political climate, sustainable design and architecture, I don't think has ever been at a better place and a more aligned place than it is right now. And as somebody who's made that kind of the thrust of their career, which I didn't expect 25 years ago in college, I couldn't be more excited about that. It's really an exciting time to practice architectural design.
It's funny. I've been around a little bit longer than you have, and I remember first when leads start becoming a thing. You know, it just like, what is this thing? And nobody understood it. And it was confusing. And then everybody started understanding it. People started getting excited, and I want to get these plaques and I want to meet this. And then I remember when Passive House started coming out, and everybody's like, what the heck is that? And there's just like no way we're ever going to design a project to those kind of levels. That's just so far. Was so misunderstood and just confusing to people and so far out there. And I work for an enclosure consultant now, and I'm writing passive house masters because we're writing passive house specs on projects
Right.
a lot all the time, and all of a sudden passive house isn't so scary. So it's been really fun and interesting to watch this evolution of how we did buildings when I started in this business at 20 years old. We won't add
Mhm.
up how many years that's been, but and how we do buildings now, and how drastically different the goals and motivation and the real true heart behind how healthy and light and warm that our buildings are now, as opposed to that was not the way it was when I started, in the industry. So that gives me hope, even in our current insane political environment, um, that we're still hopefully going to end up in a better place. We hope. We're crossing our fingers. I won't go there though. Let's get into the scope of this project a little bit. Before we get into the programming, just give me a broad description of the scope. What does this building
Yep.
include?
Yeah. So it's academic classroom building that includes a variety of different arts and sciences teaching spaces. So it doesn't include humanities spaces; those are in another set of buildings on campus. But a, a majority of their arts and science teaching spaces have moved into this building. So for them, that's things as kind of core as painting and drawing, to printmaking, photography, And then on the science side, there is kind of more conventional chemistry, physics labs, but there's also geology lab, as I mentioned earlier, zoology lab, which is truly unique. So they do large sea mammal dissection in this building, which is very technically complicated. It also has a botany lab and full propagation greenhouse as part of the botany uh, pedagogy in the building as well. And so really the technical challenges that is that typically in higher ed, you would see those uses separated into different buildings because technically we would want to try to align those use types so that the systems in the building could essentially be doing the same thing because they had to be together, not just because of the size of the campus and the need practically to put them together, but the cross-disciplinary approach to their pedagogy, they wanted to be in close proximity. Um, it created a really unique technical challenge, particularly related to the passive house level energy performance that they told us we had to achieve by taking the job. And we can get into those specifics in a bit, but the program's essentially diverse arts and science labs and studios with some office space adjacent to it.
So I'm curious about programming, even more so now that you've already mentioned a couple things. But I did the first 22 years of my career, I did mainly educational facilities
Yep.
is what I worked on. And, public work, and, public work is accountable to the public. So there were large groups typically during programming. Your process here was a little different with this whole town hall concept or town meeting concept, where you could have a lot of people in the room. And it's hard sometimes to get where you need to go when you have that many cooks in the kitchen or that many different opinions. How did you manage all of that
Yeah.
to keep, because what would hold us up oftentimes was trying to bring everybody together to make the next step. Let's get to agreement here so we can make the next step. With that many people contributing to the process, how did you keep it moving?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So initially, we were kind of told by fire hose that this is going to have to be the way that you engage. You have to meet with literally all of these people. And so, Susie at that point had much, much more experience in programming for higher ed than I did. And I think we went into it with an open mind and tried to just bring as much stamina to it as we could and just spent incredibly long days on campus together, meeting with as many people as we could in smaller groups. And then trying to gather bigger groups and literally report back to them what they'd said without any initial synthesis or editorializing of what they'd said, just so that they could hear themselves and start to hear what the commonalities in their comments were. And I think thankfully, because they were all part of that community, it was pretty consistent, which is good. And I think that also is usually what I've learned over time. Now I've been done a lot more institutional work since then that I've found that usually tracks with need. If there's a high need, then you'll see commonality in response because people are starting to kind of coalesce around the need. And so that made it easier. But I'll tell you, it really transformed the way we do programming internal at OPAL, whether we're collaborating or not. I took a lot from that experience of this much more horizontal programming than I'd been used to before that. I'd been used to smaller design committees. These are the people making the decisions, key, like very clear and linear governance structures. And now I actually recommend a much more horizontal, much more, let's say, rigorous and intensive sessions early on with more people to clients if they don't know yet how they want to handle programming. Because I think the results from that project really changed my mind on how open I was willing to be to listen when you're forced to listen to that many people. And so now, and I don't know, should ask my staff whether they like this or not, but I will recommend an 8-hour programming session to a new institutional client where they're welcome to come and go as they please, but I want them to bring as many of their community in as possible. And I will sit there and talk for 8 hours straight with them till I make sure that I can hear from everybody. And the reason I do that is to try to be inclusive and equitable in the programming to make sure that we don't miss anything. There at College of the Atlantic, we were told we had to. Now I'm doing it electively because the results were so transformative, being able to literally hear every comment. And I don't know. It's I, I'm a runner in my non-architectural life. I do ultra marathons, so maybe I have a particular aptitude for sitting in a room and enduring 8 hours programming at a time. But I do think generally it's yielded better results, and I'm really thankful to this project for letting me see what was possible with that. So
Well, and I'd agree with you too, because I've worked on a lot of projects now over all these years, and every single project I have worked on that went beyond that core decision making group and really dug into the user group, whether it's the teachers or the students, whatever the building is. Um, every single one came out better. I really truly believe that, because I think you could have that core group that may know their people and may know their building, but they don't necessarily use it the same way like the students do, or maybe the teachers do. They're never going to have that perspective because their participation in that space is different. And I don't,
yep.
I know a lot of architects talk to user groups to some degree. I often feel like there is not enough focus on that in the beginning. And what happens down the road? Yeah, I love the building, but this doesn't work the way I need it to, or this space isn't quite what I wanted. And maybe those comments could be prevented from happening if there was more focus at that phase. And it may also make the rest of the project go a little more smoothly. Less
Yeah, I
surprises
think I
down
think
the
you're right.
road.
I totally agree. I don't think there's anything that you can do to replace that time spent at the very beginning before you've even put pencil to paper. I agree.
I couldn't agree more. So this was a little bit new to me. The Davis Center was designed to meet German passive house standards. Tell
Yes,
me exactly, in the context of this project, what that means and how you achieved it.
sure. So, as some of your listeners may know, there is Passive House US and there's Passive House International. So, decisions were made by organizations to separate those two certification metrics. Geez, almost 10 years ago now, I think. Our initial passive houses that we certified, and so now we're talking 15 years ago, was the first passive house that our firm certified. At that point was only the 12th passive house in the US. There was still only one standard. Those standards are still consistently used in all the other countries of the world, um, except for the US, where FIAS has slightly different standards. Um, so PHI, which is the metrics that were used in to establish College of the Atlantic's building performance standards, particularly in the energy section of their standards. Really, it regulates several things through an exhaustive energy modeling platform called Passive House Planning Packet, which I'm sure listeners know, some of you that do Passive House. very intense spreadsheet. OPAL, we've modeled our internal proprietary energy model that we use on every project off of PHPP, Passive House Planning Packet. And we are, I think, fairly unique among architectural firms in that we do maintain a proprietary energy model. And the reason we do that is that it's portable to any project, whether they're certifying or not, but we can always check and see if this is close to Passive House because we know based on outcomes that that will yield direct benefit to the end user, whether they're certifying or not. So in this project, we're told up front, we don't do certifications here. What we do, though, is measure our buildings and make sure that you met our goals. So here's the goals. And for PHI, we're really looking at three key numbers. For a non-certified building, we're looking at total annual heat load per square foot. And well, in PHI terms, it's per square meter, but when we're converting everything, we typically try to make it useful to the owners because they're not living in Europe. So we're looking at total heat load per square foot, which is in Passive House standards, 4.75 kBTU per square foot per year. We're looking at total energy use per square foot per year, what we think of as EUI for U.S. architects. Passive House International calls primary energy. The only real difference there is that they calculate it all the way back to the source, so all the line loss from the production of the energy is included when they look at it as Passive House. Thankfully, on this project, for the other architects that were competing for the work, the college had already computed it down into EUI, so they were looking to hit a target EUI in their brief of 23 kBTU per square foot per year, which is essentially a Passive House level primary energy target. So that made perfect sense to us. We're like, okay, we know what we're doing here. We do this every day. And then the third thing is hitting a completed air pressurization test. So taking a blower door into the building, pressurizing the building once it's all done, and recording the results at 50 pascals of positive and negative pressure, and making sure it stays under 0.6 air changes per hour. And so essentially, if you're hitting those three components, you're on your way to a certified Passive House. They weren't looking to certify, but they had the same numbers in their criteria. And so it was a language we already spoke. What we didn't know yet was how are we going to do that and still offer 12 air changes per hour in a zoology lab because of the pathogens in a dead whale. That was a totally new challenge. And I kind of some days wish we'd certified because I'm pretty sure there is not a certified Passive House that has a zoology dissection lab in it in the world. I don't know that for sure, but I'm pretty sure. And that level of air changes per hour is beyond even a hospital level of air changes per hour. And so we knew that was going to be the big challenge, is the systems to support that. We were fairly confident, having done many Passive Houses in northern New England, that we knew the mix of exterior glazed and opaque envelope that would work, and where we needed to kind of situate the high occupancy spaces to make sure we weren't getting lots of overheating and things like that. And we had a great mechanical engineering partner in Van Zelm out of Connecticut that had experience, although they hadn't certified a Passive House, that had experience with this level of energy performance before. So we knew the team was in place. We knew we could kind of like figure out the technical details from our experience in detailing those types of buildings. But the systems were really experimental. Like we had to build custom ventilation systems in order to handle that and still have it not really ratchet up the energy requirements of the building. Yeah.
I bet that was fun.
I
I,
thought it was great. It was really fun.
I'm pretty sure you will be the only architect I will ever talk to in my entire life that told me about a whale dissection lab and trying to make it Passive House. I
Yeah.
just know that conversation is never going to happen again. um, I don't typically talk about materials this early in an interview, but you put a lot of thought into the material choices for this project
Yep.
to reduce the embodied carbon and
Mhm.
be cohesive with the bioregional aesthetic.
Yep.
Give me a summary of some of the unique material choices that were made on this project.
Sure. So this came from another, section of their own requirements that um they wanted a full, in their words, full LCA, life cycle assessment, done of the building. And again, this brief came out in 2017. So if we all can kind of go back in time 8 years and remember where we were on life cycle assessment in general, at that point, Tally, which is a platform that a lot of you listeners might be used to or familiar with, was only in its like beta version at that point. We were one of the early adopters. The first copy we got of Tally was in 2018, and it was to start running models on this project. Um, and that is still obviously a methodology and an approach that is highly debated. The um, agreement on methodology isn't consistent across the globe. We are thankful to be one of the early adopters and thought leaders in the space of developing whole building LCA methodology. But it really did start here, like for us. We knew it was something we were going to have to start doing. So we saw that starting to be assessed by building science people, and we're like, okay, now that we have a handle on energy, how do we start thinking about materials? And so to have a project to test it on where they were quite explicit, like we would like to explore the possibility of bio-based materials for this building, and we would like to run life cycle assessments. All right. So way back at that point, we were one of the early firms to have done a mass timber building. We did that in 2014 as a tiny, tiny little house. You can see it on our website. It's called Little House on the Ferry. It's been published in a lot of places. It looks like three little CLT Monopoly blocks, and it was one of the first CLT buildings in the US. So we had some experience with mass timber. We also had, at that point in time, this burgeoning side project of one of my business partners, Matt O'Malia, and another co-founder were starting a wood fiber insulation company, which is now has a name and is producing material. It's called Timber HP, that some of your listeners might also know. Now it's spun off as its total own thing, which is great. And they're producing material. And so kind of had these ideas percolating. It's like, well, could we start to think about an academic building of this scale that would typically be done in steel and concrete? That would be a very normal way to build a building of this size at this on this schedule at this cost. Could you be looking at a mass timber structure with all wood exterior assembly, including insulation? And not surprisingly, the college, especially, I think the student and staff community got incredibly excited about that potential opportunity. Um, we could talk about it from a design perspective in terms of leaning into kind of a new generation of wood construction in New England, which has this very, very long history. And we could talk to their kind of the science folks at the institution about you know all the all the ways we can store carbon within the structure and within the insulation and these other things, and then the administration about how it aligned with their sustainability goals and maintaining the standard. And it was a real kind of um, I think winning proposal that we didn't yet know how to do, and we didn't know at that point. And again, it's hard to remember where we were in 2018 when we were designing this building. That mass timber wasn't nearly as available as it is now. In fact, we had to design this as a hybrid where it's a mass timber glulam frame, but the actual deck, because we couldn't get CLT that easily then, in on the schedule we wanted, is actually made of local tongue and groove solid spruce, like super thick decking. So we basically made a solid wood panel on site by nailing them together instead of buying CLT. Subsequent projects for the college, we were able to do full mass timber, but this point, we really couldn't make it work. And at this point, Timber HP didn't even yet have a name. So in order to be a case study project for all wood insulation, the college committed to bringing in wood fiber insulation through 475 Building Supply from Germany. They used Gutex in this case. So it was a hybrid of bio-based materials that now are all the rage of everyone in architecture. Like, we want to produce these things at scale. And I think we sometimes forget that it takes like case study projects, people willing to take a risk, people willing to maybe spend a little less money somewhere else to invest in that risk, and then being able to show it off in order to build the market for these things down the road, that they really do take these physical manifestations. And so it was a really great day that we were able to go and actually offer the reporting at the end of, I think, design development after we'd picked all the materials, and show how much carbon they'd stored in the building in terms of just number of trips that they have this thing on campus called the night bus, which just brings students that live in Bar Harbor, which is about a mile away, to the college every day and every night. And when we first started the design, one of the other topics at the meeting where we did our first presentation was whether they should invest in a second night bus. And their concern was the amount of emissions from the night bus. And then 6 months later, we were able to show the amount of stored carbon in this building, just in the bio-based materials, and say, remember that conversation you're having about the emissions impact of this second night bus? Well, you could operate this night bus for 1,000 years just based on the amount of stored carbon and the materials you've chosen instead of concrete and steel. Now, our methodology at that time isn't the way, or as the way we would do it now, or is like mathematically accurate as the way we present it now. But I think to be able to kind of start early on to convert what seems like very abstract numbers to people into real terms that are the subject of debate within their community was a kind of like a huge moment of the project, and realize, okay, we have some traction here on topics that aren't just energy savings, that can speak to an entire community of people. So the materials became this kind of real kind of core of the project. And we actually on our website, we call this project an education in wood, because I think it also taught us like how far we could go with this, like that we didn't have to limit ourselves in wood construction to just small things, that it could get quite large. So
I'm really proud of myself here listening to you, that I recognize all the terminology you're using. My firm
come a
just
long way in 10
finished
years.
a moisture management guide for mass timber, and I wrote
It's great.
a guide spec to go with that guide for moisture management. And it's like, I'm learning more here than I thought. As you're talking, I'm going, yeah, I know what that is. I know what that is. I'm hoping our listeners just learned a whole lot. So I ask this question of almost everybody because I work for an enclosure. I work with all those building scientists. And I'll tell you, that makes you up your game. You want to really up your game, go work for a bunch of building enclosure consultants. Tell me about the enclosure design of this
Sure.
building.
Yeah. So we were able to kind of quite early on really reduce the options available to the client based on meeting their energy performance goals. So right away, we were focusing specifically on enclosure manufacturers, glazing manufacturers. They could offer glass designed specifically for a northern Atlantic climate. Early in the design, Susie and I had made the decision to kind of locate the building at this northern and eastern edge of this previously developed site, so that we could kind of hold the more public facing, the more glazed portion to the east and south, and kind of protect against some of the pressurization from the northeastern winds, which is pretty high up here. And even in passive house design, where you have a really extensive air sealing layer, we do see pressure difference when we get to um, scales of wall at this size. So that was an early design decision that was made at the campus level that helped support this. So the majority of the glazing was south and east, and we're designing the enclosure specifically to try to passively condition all of the transient spaces that could then cascade into the classroom spaces along that northern and eastern edge. So those transient spaces all face south and west. We honed in early on Unilux as a partner for that, for the glazed portion of the enclosure. So German company that we've worked with a lot in the past that we knew, um, one could offer both areas of curtain wall and areas of operable window, and we needed both. We needed them to match. We needed to have the exact same performance criteria. Um, they could offer a true deep triple glazed IGU, which is important to maintain the overall value of the assembly, which is going to be critical for the passive house compliance. And the kind of icing on the cake is that they offered bird safe glazing as a standard offering. And so again, obviously there's more options on that now than there was in 2018 when we were designing the building. But the increased costs and the reduction in performance from a domestic manufacturer were significant to get both bird safe glazing and high solar heat gain coefficient and incredibly low U value glass at the same time. Unilux, because of a partnership with Ornilux, offered that as a standard option. And so at the time when we specified it, it was the biggest building in the US that had Ornilux bird safe glazing, which again is a UV bird safe glazing, laminated film. So for those that don't know about it, it's intended to be optically clear when viewed head on. You can see the pattern in it when you view it at an oblique angle, and the UV reflection is designed to be opaque to avian eyes. Um, After that project, it was one of our early projects with extensive bird safe glazing and trying to integrate that with a passive house glazing system. We have worked with a bunch of different brands now, but and different styles of bird safe glazing, including both Fritz and UV patterns, and have my own opinions on what's better now. But at that point, it was again another case study, and actually in that case, the institution did support a recommendation of a case study for that building, and they had been tracking bird strikes on that building ever since, which is great. So we do have some real post occupancy evaluation data, even in bird strikes, which is awesome. You don't always get that level of detail, but those are kind of the key criteria. We wanted to be able to hit those performance goals, hit those kind of levels of transparency to that public facing campus facade, and still maintain bird habitat, not have it become just a graveyard for the birds on site. We were really happy with that partnership. There was a bit of an education in teaching local glazing subs how to use wood curtain wall. So Unilux's curtain wall is wood, not aluminum, which most glazers are used to. And that was new, but turns out you can cut wood mullions just as easy as you can cut aluminum mullions, and so it's not that hard. But there's always a learning curve when things look different. But I think we're really happy in the end with that as a partnership.
What about your roofing system? Did you do anything unique there?
Nothing super unique on the roofing. It's probably the most conventional portion of the building. I think the form of the roof is unique in that we designed kind of three sections of sloped roofing across a, let's call it an aggregate flat roof that captures them all. And those three sections of sloped roofing were designed specifically to house the quantity of photovoltaic panels that they wanted to keep on site on the building. They own another solar farm on the island separate from the site. So that was specifically designed as standing seam metal roofing so we could easily support the photovoltaic panels. And one of the key reasons that we actually try to offer passive house levels of energy performance to owners is so that their photovoltaic arrays can be housed on the roofs and they don't have to build expensive secondary structures. Not always the same way we approach it with a campus because they have other land, but here we did design those areas of roof specifically to house that size array. But it is just standard standing seam metal roofing, custom seamed on site, and the areas of flat roof are EPDM roofing.
So we already talked about the bio-based insulation a little bit and why you chose that route. I'm curious because I don't remember back in 2017 or 2018 how common that was at that time. Um, what did the testing look like for that? I mean, did you have, you know we test the heck out of everything these days. Did you have the testing? Like, how did you know you were going a good route with that
Mm.
to meet your goals? I can't imagine that enough of it was being used around to have a whole lot of metrics, but maybe it was, and maybe I just don't understand.
We had a lot of experience over time in being early adopters of European products that had maybe a history of use case in a different construction climate in Europe that we could point to. And then I think the pleasure of working with clients that were willing to be early adopters and understand that just because something hadn't been constructed or tested in the US market didn't necessarily mean that the physical characteristics of the material or product were any different. And so we were just trying to take, and we still do, try to take that same attitude to any potential new technology that we see an opportunity for in our market. So 15 years ago, that was windows, right? And now there's better domestic window manufacturing. But 15 years ago, we were literally partnering with a import-export company out of Washington, D.C. to ship windows for our clients as architects. Like, we were buying the windows through an importer with an agreement with a German window manufacturer because we're like, we're not going to be subject to the crappy glass that you get in the US if it's not appropriate for the climate. And so the same is the case with things like wood fiber insulation. There is a history of use that goes back decades in Europe. Um, and the thing that we were starting to see there was that in we would go over to passive house conferences and tour these buildings or manufacturing plants of prefabricated housing and see these just like huge bags of loose fill wood insulation or rigid wood insulation, rigid board being put into panelized product projects. And we're like, we don't, what is this? First of all, second, how are you using this? Like, why do we not have this? And we were further kind of mystified by the reality that there isn't even a excess of the material in Europe that you would use to make that. So wood fiber insulation is made from the same residual material from the lumber industry that we use to make paper, the exact same process. You just don't press it as hard. And the air that's entrapped within that gives it insulative qualities. But as the paper mills in the US have closed, particularly in our region in New England, um, all of the sawmills that cut lumber have these stockpiles of bark and chips that they can't sell to anyone. We're like, wow, it'd be a really great thing to make that here because they've been doing it in Europe for 20 years and chips are really expensive there because they don't have all this excess forest. And so we're like, we need to find a way to test case this. We absolutely need to find projects where you can try this out and show that it can do the same thing that any insulation could. And so people's initial questions, of course, were, well, and that they have with any bio-based insulation. It's like, well, okay, what happens if it gets wet? Well, honestly, the way wood acts when it's wet is fairly hydrophobic. Um, Very similar to the way rock wool or foam would react. Okay, well, what happens when when there's fire? Like it must be bad because it's made of wood, right? Like it has to be bad. Like, well, the benefit we had there was the Grenfell Tower disaster had just happened, and that was foam. And we're like, well, it's definitely not an accelerant, and we can do flame tests to prove that it's not an accelerant. And in fact, what happens is that the surface of it chars and then it just smokes. You can't really catch it on fire. And anyone that has tried to light a fire, I'd say, in their fire pit and doesn't start with kindling and just throws a log in and tries to light it, you know that it's kind of impossible. And it kind of acts the same way. We had that testing from Europe, but not from the US. And we knew that within a certain size, the building code would still allow it as a combustible product. And so we needed that perfect project that was as big as possible, that still fit within that construction classification. And thankfully, College of the Atlantic was that. It wasn't too tall, it wasn't too big. You could use all wood products without having any flame spread testing yet. And the coolest thing on this project actually happened by accident. Um, They'd already committed to doing it. They were installing the wood fiber on the building. They had a pile of scraps that was sitting on site, kind of a little bit away from the beginning, away from the building. And they had an accident where a worker from another trade um, forgot to turn off a propane tank, and it caught something on fire in the early morning. And the fire spread to the wood fiber insulation. This was kind of early in the morning, and the president of the college, who happened to be on the volunteer fire department for the local town of Bar Harbor, came to the site, and I get a call at 6 a.m. from Darren, and I answered it because he's my client, and I'm going to answer it. And he's like, "We have a problem. There's a fire." And I was like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "Well, the wood fiber caught fire." And I was like, "Okay, well, you got to go and look at it, and you got to film it because we want to see what happens." And he gets there, and it exactly what we'd seen in the testing in the lab testing in Europe, where we were doing kind of non-controlled testing within our office or in the kind of growing of the eventual temper HP plant. It was just smoking, and there was no open flame. And the firefighters just buried it, left it. And that was the end of it. And so it gave us this great confidence and the ability to have that little piece of practical knowledge that, yes, in fact, while testing is very important, and as we bring this product to market now as its own company, yes, all those same tests that we do on any material they're going through them at Timber HP. But it does take kind of some of these practical examples sometimes to start that process. And so working within codes, but still understanding what the actual reality was versus the risk that's perceived by a specific material.
I am laughing at that story. That's like one of the best project stories I've heard in a while. Client, 6 a.m. The building's on fire. Architect, go film it.
Thankfully, it wasn't the actual building. It was just materials near it.
Right.
But
Go
I'm
film
very
it.
well worried.
I love it. Describe the interior aesthetic of this
Sure.
space. I mean, you've told me about, generally some of the spaces. So I call it the warm fuzzies. What's the look and feel
Yeah.
of the space and some of the maybe more unique finishes or materials you used on the interior?
Yeah. So, really, our goal almost entirely was to celebrate the decision to use this hybrid mass timber and solid wood structure as much as possible. So, in all classroom spaces, the structural systems, those glulam mass timber beams that come from our neighbors just to the north in Quebec are exposed. The solid spruce decking that was local to Maine is exposed. On the second floor, we're using uh, that same local wood to create acoustic ceilings, unfinished acoustic ceilings. So always it was about celebrating that decision to focus on a wood building and let that be the decorative element in all of the teaching spaces. Um, and then even in the kind of transient hallway spaces that flow along that campus facade, we're bringing that same wood into kind of the bridge connection across to the offices. It's really the through line in the project, and it's the I would say the only true decorative material. There's a few accent walls of um of acoustic fabric. We're bringing in some accent in the furniture and things like that, but essentially they're trying to be very utilitarian and authentic, honest spaces. So you have the concrete flooring and then the beauty of the local wood itself. Um, Even in spaces like they were early adopters of gender neutral bathrooms. So they have these large common wash sinks. Those are all clad in wood with a custom cast concrete sink cast locally, and then just a huge window out to the ocean, and trying to make it about um, that biophilic recognition of this just amazing space, this amazing place in the world that people travel from all over the world to see, that they happen to actually go to school in. Like, let's use that as the decorative element and not have to kind of really make anything inward focusing. Um, Now it's kind of the goal, and honestly, I think it's probably one of the major reasons we're able to keep the cost of the building low too, because, when you're surrounded by that much beauty and you have that much beauty in the structure, you don't have to add all the, decorative costs you might need to in other contexts, and I think it was definitely a huge benefit, to the project financially to be able to lean into that.
Well, you also sent me pictures and it is an incredibly gorgeous location.
Yes.
And I truly appreciate as I was looking in the pictures, I love all the wood. I love the wood everywhere. But I truly appreciate that you didn't, because it fits so well and so beautifully with that background and the water. Um, and I think you can take away from that. I think if you over decorate or over enhance, some of those interior finishes, you've seen it. Some people go crazy. They've got stuff everywhere. It really takes away with how that just flows so naturally together. And um,
Yeah.
I'm a minimalist at heart anyway. So less is more to me. But I was like, oh, who is so lucky to get to go to school in this place? I just want to go hang out. I am curious though. I tend to go off track on occasion. I'm listening to this, and at the time of 2017, when we didn't have as many people building, I mean, you had wood everywhere, curtain wall, insulation, wood in the interior. Were there any challenges with the building department to get I would imagine there would have been some extra questions at that time on that building.
Um, we were really dedicated to trying to make sure we stayed within the square footage allowance of the construction classification to not add the extra challenge of variances to the amount of risk the owner was taking on a lot of these products that were newer at the time. And so that I think was a little bit lucky, but it was just part of the Venn diagram of the project that those things aligned, that the building wasn't quite big enough where that became an actual, code conflict. It was allowable, under the code. Um, we did have questions about, just smoke development and things like that. We did have a fire engineer on the project that designed a smoke purge system for the possibility of smoke development given, a two-story space for the transient kind of hallway space in the public facing side of the building. I it's we did that as something that we wanted to make sure everybody felt comfortable. It's hard to design systems and spend money on systems that will probably never ever run unless they had a fire. But I mean, it's like so rare that those systems ever actually get actuated. But that's really the only additive thing that we did in order to make sure everyone was comfortable. Um, and I think it was the only request that we thought was kind of borderline from the state fire marshal's office. But other than that, it was all pretty well aligned. And I do think we do have a history in northern New England of building with wood, and we do have code. Officers and code boards in each state that are really dedicated to ensuring that there is a future of building in wood. And I think we look at Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, our other northern New England kind of, let's say, sibling states were all early to advance portions of the code that allowed for mass timber. That came after this project, but even ahead of the full adoption of those codes, we were early on adopting that portion because I think everybody really wants to see wood construction remain a key part of the way we build here. Um, so that was good. I mean, I think that there was a lot of alignment on that part, and people were happy to see that happen.
Well, that's great to hear, especially when you're innovating,
Yeah.
to get that support so that you can move the needle forward and we can progress to some of the things that we're doing now that we weren't doing then.
Yep.
Either design or construction. I always have to ask at least one question about what was hard. So you choose, but design or construction, what would you say was the most challenging thing that you had to tackle on this project? And how did you get to where you needed to go?
Yeah. So I think design was quite smooth. I'd say us learning to adapt to having the 450 clients of that very horizontal institution was a challenge early on and then an asset. Once consensus was reached, it became a huge asset um, to have all the support. I think later in design, finding the right construction partner that was willing to entertain all of those potential risks and quotes that we talked about with some of the materials and products, I think was a challenge later, but not insurmountable. We ended up aligning with a local firm that had done work on the campus prior. At that point, almost 2 decades prior, but had a history with the college. Like wanted to see them succeed, and so was willing to kind of walk that walk with them. I'd say in construction, honestly, this most significant challenge is we started construction of this building in April of 2019, and we all know what happened the following year. And so the second half of the entire construction schedule was done under peak COVID conditions. There was a point where we had to kick a whole bunch of subcontractors off site because of violating the campus COVID guidelines, and construction just got slower, harder for everyone. As a collaborative team with my collaborative partner in New York, Susie couldn't come to the project for probably 6 months or more, in the second half of construction, and we were having to conduct, well, we all went through it. We know what we were up against during those times, but I think that to finish construction during that peak condition was really hard, and a testament to the builder. And I'll just give them a shout out, E.L. Shea and Ellsworth. Just an amazing job of handling all that, because it wasn't easy, and all the projects we had going on at that time um, didn't all have as successful results, and so it was a lot to try to keep showing up and producing at the level that they did. So
Well, and up in that part of the country, being somewhat familiar with it, I don't imagine, number one, it's COVID, getting subcontractors and getting teams together and getting materials was challenging for everybody. But then, being in, smaller towns and maybe not having as many options for skilled labor close by, and
yep,
then having to kick a bunch of subs off the site, it's like I can imagine that got pretty interesting there for a while.
it did, and I think it eventually people kind of got into the swing of things. But yeah, it was. I think it was especially challenging in, say, the second half of 2020, when the college brought their students back, and they had very restrictive guidelines because they have a international, you know, uh, student demographic that had to have their needs met, um, and an administration that desperately wanted to meet those needs because that's their currency, is offering education, and builders who really just wanted to be able to show up on site and do their job the way they were used to doing it, and those two things were incongruent at times. And I think that's in some cases probably, I think the challenge presented itself very differently in urban areas than in rural areas. We had a project that was on the exact same uh, project schedule, that was a K through 12 private school outside of Boston at the same time. And so I was going every week to both projects, and to see how it was handled there versus at College of the Atlantic. It's just really interesting. Not better or worse in either one, both with really successful outcomes, but the culture around it was very different, just because of that level of urbanity that you described. So it's interesting to see the approach.
Before we get to our two closing questions, this is your chance to kind of celebrate your firm and what you're up to. So what are you working on now? What is Opal working on now that I can look forward to calling you later about and saying, "Hey Timothy, can you come back and tell me about this one?"
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd say a few things. We have the pleasure right now to have several smaller institutional projects that have just started this year, that are in the from an ecological design lens, they are in the area of kind of, let's say, like more advanced adaptive reuse approaches as it relates to whole building life cycle assessment. And to be able to take kind of, we talked about where we were 8 years ago, and where we as a firm have become kind of noted leaders in that space, and be able to take that applied knowledge and methodology to actual projects where you can show the benefit of choosing circularity and circular design over um, portions of addition, portions of new building, and show the potential return on investment in that has kind of been really exciting. And so there's a couple projects there that are just in their infancy. Um, and then in the kind of like, if I look back medium term, we just recently, middle of last year, completed our second building with College of the Atlantic, which hasn't been published yet, which is a housing building where we were able to, after the success of the building we just spent all this time talking about, basically the president coming back to us and saying, okay, now let's do all the things that we couldn't do because they were too risky on this building. And that building, I was able to talk a little bit about during construction, but I'm really, really excited in the next year to share it with everybody because it was really like me getting set loose in the candy store. It's as like the kind of leader within the firm of setting our direction on ecological design to be able to say, I'm I can really try all this stuff. Yeah. And like, okay, do it. So so that one I'm super excited to share, but we haven't been able to just yet because we're still placing it in publication. We haven't submitted for awards yet or anything like that. So that's first things. Those things are coming later. Those are years away. And then the second COA building we can't wait to share with people, and that'll be in the next year or
Well,
so.
you just dangled a big old huge carrot, so I expect you to tell me when you are ready to share it because I would love to hear about it.
Absolutely will. Yeah.
We typically close with two questions, one being the first of which being a broader industry question, but I'm straying today because sometimes I just do that. Um, and you touched on this in the beginning a little bit, but in your project description, you mentioned Opal's dimensions of building ecology framework.
Mhm.
And that's quotes around that, people. Tell me what that is and why
Sure.
it's important.
That's a really appropriate question for this discussion, because we realized when we received that incredibly thorough and specific guidelines for sustainable design from the College of the Atlantic, by far the most aggressive set of sustainability criteria that I've received from a client, never I expect to receive from a client. Usually we want to certify some level of LEED or we want to get a passive house certification, and that's very known for us. And it's like not a big deal usually. We're like, okay, that's fairly normal request. This was so long, again, 9 pages, so many different criteria, combing through all these different certifications, and it's clearly what they'd done. The students had gone through all these things and they decided these were important, and it made us kind of look at our approach again. And I like to tell people, is like, as much as I've become a leader and advocate in the sustainable design space, I really do deeply love being an architect, and I see myself as a designer first. um, the power that I saw in that document was, if I know from 10 years of practice in Passive House at that time, how Passive House has changed the way I start a project as a designer, how could all of these other things change the way I start a project as a designer? How would it change canonically the way Opal designs buildings if we were to actually engage with it? And I knew in order to do that, I had to distill it from something that was just a bunch of numbers, which I understood, but I knew my clients probably didn't, with the exception of maybe College of the Atlantic, um, into something that was digestible and designable. Like, it had to be design first. It had to make design impact. And I think even in certifications, even broad and aggressive ones like, say, Living Building Challenge, a lot of the criteria that help you achieve the various petals of a living building challenge are not actually design criteria. They're choices made by an owner, which are totally fine. That's not a value statement. But as a designer, that's not very impactful for me because it doesn't change the way I approach a project. It's a question that gets asked to the owner to give permission for me to put something in a spec or draw something in a drawing. And as important as I think some certifications can be, I'm going to be totally honest, it's not very interesting to me as an architect to do that. What is deeply interesting to me as an architect is points in our history of design where you can see a shift in the way people are actually approaching the work. We talked about that a little bit earlier in this kind of moving beyond certifications discussion. And I think what we saw at that point, and again, coming out of the design of this project, is like, we really need to make Opal's version of this. Like, we need a version that can be the guiding light for how we approach a project. And for me, as the leader in the firm running that work, I said, it's got to be something that I can see my clients engaging with, that can offer all these new ways into a discussion about ecological building design. And so it needs to have metrics or better design choices that affect us, that are offering benefit to the end user, that allows them to see themselves within that framework. And what I was starting to see was that so many clients, and we started this work in 2019 and 2020, were suddenly asking me all these questions about the indoor air quality of their buildings because of questions around COVID and air filtration and outdoor fresh air, and things that we took for granted as passive house designers that we'd just done were really now key criteria for our clients. And I was like, wow, like this is an insightful moment. It's a teaching moment for us because all of a sudden we've been offered a new gateway for for owners, for clients, for allies. And so we divided what we saw as a kind of whole world of different sustainable criteria into 5 categories. Um, and we chose 5 arbitrarily because we thought we could accurately sort them into the scale of community affected by the design decisions. So it started with the largest community, which we call Habitable Planet, which is about building emissions. So it affects our global greenhouse gases. It affects the entire community of the globe, and it's directly affected by design decisions we make in the energy used by the building and the materials extracted to build the building. And so that was kind of the biggest one, all the way down to the smallest one, which we call healthy communities, which was just as important, but a smaller community of just the users of the building and those people that are kind of beyond our lives that will use the building in the future. And then in the middle, we addressed circular economies, we addressed the water cycle, and we addressed the site ecosystem in these 5 categories. And I said, we need to distill this down into 3 design decisions that any designer in our practice could make that would reduce impact and use less stuff in general across these 5 categories. And it took us maybe 6 months to a year of meeting as a team. We had this team of 5 people within the firm. We were combing through all of the different certifications that we could get our hands on, and then just building science thinking from our colleagues beyond certifications that we had access to, which is pretty broad. And we're able to put this thing together that now we can use across any project. And there's intense data and metrics behind the scenes, but the client sees 15 design choices. They don't see the numbers. They don't need to see the numbers because it's about us leading them and showing them in an intersectional way how their choices on, oh, all the kids fall asleep in this one classroom are affected by the ventilation system that they picked to reduce the amount of energy in the building, and they're related. And I think it's become this like really transformational tool that we can use. And I'm not asking like every architect to be like go out there and build your own framework. It was fun for me. I think fun for the people that took part in it. But really, what I see it as is a way to allow the clients to feel like they're part of that process without having to have the depth of knowledge to understand what kg CO2 EQ is in terms of an emissions unit. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, we're addressing that at the global scale. We're also addressing your needs for ventilation at the human scale. So it's a teaching tool. It's a kind of guiding canonical framework for us as designers. And it's a way for us to educate ourselves on reducing impact.
I had to ask that question because as I was, reading, I don't know how many times in my career I've sat in a meeting and I work in this business and I didn't understand what the architects around me were explaining to the client. And you sit there and I like to call myself an empath sometimes because I seem to see things other people don't. But you're watching your clients, watching their body language, watching their eyes glaze over, and you lose something in your process when that happens. When you
Yep.
forget they hired you to know all those numbers in the background. They don't want to know that. There might be some that do. And there might be certain points where you have to dig in a little deeper and explain more of that.
Yep.
That's not how they need to hear it, though. And I really love that you built this framework to communicate that information so they can make the best possible decisions that they're able to make with the money that they have for their
Yeah.
project. So that's why you got that question today. So now
I think
hopefully
the
everybody
other,
will think about it.
yeah, just to add to it, one of the other big one of the other big reasons for doing this was to show across all of these different um, communities affected that one of the single biggest things we can do as architects is as designers and in engagement with our owner is just the act of restraint that the lesson from Passive House of starting by using as little energy as possible and then adding things to that to make it even more impactful and beneficial is a great it's a great kind of mantra to take across anything because all of our human impacts have this ecological component that we don't always think of, and it's harming us and our ecosystem. And if we can think about it in those terms, those very simple terms of like how as designers and as partners in design, as owners, start by just being sufficient, think about these kind of core kind of criteria. It's a really great first step, and it often makes buildings cheaper and easier to build too. It's a nice benefit.
And also, very often left out of the conversation is the operating in and maintaining that building over time.
100% durability. Yep.
There's a real benefit to keeping it very user friendly, very simple, very clean, very clear to understand in the
Yep.
life cycle of that building when we're all long gone. Not just in energy, but in repairing things or
Yep.
things that you have to do when you live in that building. We never talk about that when we talk about projects, but it's probably the most important piece at the end of the day.
Well, we try to talk about it a lot.
Well,
I
good.
hope
I'm
more
glad
architects will
somebody
take
does.
the lesson that use of the building is another stakeholder group. Maintaining the building is another stakeholder group, and our design decisions affect those people as well. It's like so critically important because we're going to be dead, and our buildings survive long after
And
after
somebody's still
us.
dealing with your building
Somebody's still dealing with it,
or enjoying your building. Which one do you want them to
Mhm.
do?
Right?
So, final question. Every guest gets this question. Easiest question of the day. We all hope to live a life. I hope we all hope to live a life that leaves some kind of contribution to make this world a better place. Probably now even more than ever. Personal or professional, and you can have 20, pick one. What do you hope your impact will be?
Hmm. Yeah. I hope that when I'm gone, the not just the body of work professionally, but my dedication to serving my community of stakeholders as clients, people that interact with the things that I've designed and created, hopefully in a positive way, and my activism and advocacy for communities affected by the work we do and our interactions as humans is evident. That everything that I do is through the lens of building better, more sustainable communities. And that can be in practice, that can be at the local scale in my engagement with my community, in the town that I live in. And that's what, when I wake up in the morning, that's what excites me about design. That's what excites me about life, that it's something that we live together as humans. And I hope that when I'm gone, that that's recognized by my family and those that that have interacted with me in my work.
Timothy, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. This was an amazing conversation. I can't wait to share it with our listeners. And now I know where you live. You're coming back to tell me about this other building. I'm not going to show up at your house, but um, I really hope you'll come back and join us
Sure.
for part 2 of the amazing work being done here.
This is a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.